So just every 2 years revisit your course.
Yeah, and that's like a best practice just for online. I know that's what our instructional designers in Division of Continuing Studies recommend anyway, just to keep your content fresh and good. So just using that as a check-in to be like, what opportunities can we take? Because it is better to take an opportunity where you're already building or refreshing and focus on it then, rather than trying to one-off go back and retrofit stuff. Because I think that's the biggest challenge.
Or to put it in the culture, again, folklorist in me comes into belief systems and transmitting things from person to person into a culture of front-end design so that you have a basis. And it doesn't mean, which people don't realize about online classes either, it doesn't mean it's a one and done. You do have to revisit. And especially as we're getting more LTI functionality here, I think we have a question about everything else besides that we plug into Canvas. What do we do? Like, say I use H5P and make questions. Is it going to obey the same rules that I just set? No, it's not, I don't think. So I'm not using H5P right now for any questions that would have LTI integration into my gradebook. Nor do I plan to, because that would create me a headache. And I don't like to waste my time and stuff like that. But how do we, in many cases I can evaluate, in plenty of cases I can't. Or I'm just not technically qualified to really evaluate, period. The accessibility of the tools that have been made available to us. Came up with Adobe. Thank you. I was going to say the wrong one. I was going to say Storyline. I came up with Adobe Captivate, actually. And that pushed a project more towards Pressbooks, that pushed things like that. What should we expect from software vendors or from the UW when we get, oh, here's this wonderful new part of our digital learning system?
And so maybe to Laura's point, that regular iteration, even starting, if the whole idea is to broaden the accessibility so that there are fewer and fewer accommodations, then we do things like we start with the text, we start with the captioning, we start with the
don't hyperlink click here.
Right. Unless
okay.
Because yes.
Or I will have a fit.
Even with the alt text that says this is actually what it is, just put what it already is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the other thing about looking at who your students are is it can be used beyond disability accommodation, but also for things like, I know a big topic on campus is like food insecurity, or like, so I think kind of creating this thing that we did at Epic for testing the software is like, I was a software tester, I've never been a healthcare professional, and so they create these like roles and they kind of go through like, this is what people in this role often, this is what their training would be, this is what their daily routine is like, and so you can kind of have that in mind. And I think that you can do that with the accessibility, both in the context of disability, but also, mandatory outside of class meetings. And so, like thinking through that kind of stuff. So I think creating a kind of model, and this is another way to kind of get buy-in, and I think to make it real is to kind of construct, like, this is what students are experiencing, and we should be thinking about how our course is fitting into that experience, rather than, again, I think the legal, people get really tripped up with like legalese. So I think thinking about the student experience, and like they could be the same student. The student who needs time and a half might also need to be working.
Or it might be a completely different. A startling number of our students work a startling amount, I have found, and that as I put more and more online, where they have to do the work, they have to find the time to do the work. But if they do it at 2 a.m., it's okay. I have gotten so much more, well, I wouldn't have kept on with this French class, but, or this is going to enable me to. Disability accommodations totally aside, or somebody's mother was dying of cancer and took an online course with, it's flexible, it's the most human part of what I do, I think.
So, translate that, I'm wondering, would something like personas be helpful?
Yes.
Okay, so for faculty that kind of help to really set the context about an individual student and sort of what their circumstances are like and how that could be a factor in the way that you consider designing your course.
User stories, kind of.
Personas, user stories. I mean, personas tend to be a little bit more fleshed out than the user story, but I think user stories can also be really helpful ways of translating needs into ways that you're like, oh, well, of course as a user of an assistive technology like a screen reader, I need to do this so that I can engage with the materials. That helps to put it in the context of this is just another way of using and interacting with your course material, and of course as an instructor you want to enable access.
And far more human than the legalese, right? Because you've gotten a persona, a character, a role that's been fleshed out. Are there any of those, does anyone know, that are already created, or do instructors need to create them on their own?
I almost asked students to come with me who I think would have openly spoken about it. And maybe, I don't know of any created. I certainly know of some students who have indicated to me that if I'm trying to make things easier elsewhere for them too, they would be happy to speak up in some ways. And maybe there would be a way, I don't know, through McBurney to get some anonymous input, student experiences. What do students want us to know?
I don't know of anything. Do you know of any personas like that for already that would be, I mean, there may be some out there elsewhere in higher education. But
or even online, I wonder.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One of the, it's not at all like fully fleshed out like that, but one of the things that I linked here on the focus on greatest impact section of the handout is how people with disabilities use the web, which is from, I can't remember what it is, the web accessibility, one of the web
accessibility guidelines.
Yeah, and so that kind of lists, it's not, I think it actually contains some user stories, but it's not full personas, but it also kind of has breakdowns of like, so if you're hard of hearing, like here's things that you encounter online and how it kind of impacts you. So that could be either kind of like I think it does include some like narrative specific people examples, but it also kind of has like, these are things to think about when you're meeting these needs.
Well, and the beautiful thing about like the hard of hearing here, or the idea of captioning, is that it doesn't just help the people who are hard of hearing. It helps the people who might have too much stuff going on in their head that they need to focus a little bit better. It helps me a lot.
Who sent a text message today?
Right.
My point is, of course, that things are designed to meet a specific need, in that case, disability and hard of hearing, but it becomes something that most of us don't imagine managing our busy work and personal lives without.
I think one other thing, just to extend this notion of personas and user stories, I don't know if this resonates. I'd be curious to know your perspective, Todd, about what the accommodation letter looks like or what that conversation looks like, but I like the idea of, as a student, having some agency, and the format of a user story could be a helpful format as well, potentially, to say, as a student with, hearing impairment, I need to be able to understand what's happening in the classroom. So, something like having that way of phrasing it also makes it easier for an instructor to say like, well, this isn't about like things that I don't know anything about. This is like, hey, we're communicating in a way that we're going to understand each other, and it will lead to a better outcome, versus this kind of awkwardness maybe that, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but.
And again, it's not a regulation, then it's a human.
Yeah, like I'm telling you that this is like, in order for me to engage and be a participant in this class and to get the most out of it, this is the way that I would like to interact with you.
I don't think you're wrong. I think McBurney is doing what they can in many respects, but as my department's liaison, get the faculty members, oh my God, I got this. Yeah. What do I do? What do I have to do? How can I do this? And it looks terrifying.
Yeah.
It really does. And to faculty members, there's a little bit of a, I don't know, you're being told what to do with your course, and it doesn't
stressed
go
out
over
at the
well.
last minute before the semester,
and it's generally that day before the semester starts, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm talking about really saving and making faculty time more efficient by this culture of front-end investment in what we can do. I would raise a question about captioning. I'm designing a course right now. I know I have a student who will be interested in it in the fall, who finally has her official documentation through McBurney? And do I need to wait until she's enrolled to make that request? Am I being nicer to them by making my material available sooner? Do they have any way to address things proactively, or is it simply a reactive? Because that's the huge cost. That's the cost factor I'm finding for department. If departments are designing and people who get design budgets, I always say to budget for things like this. But that's the big cost factor that I can't necessarily do myself, and that the auto captions are really not sufficient.
They're not complying there, yeah.
Let me ask a question just based on this last sentence. Is some captioning, let me ask it this way.
Going down a rabbit hole.
Is 80 better than 0?
Is some captioning better than no captioning? Is self-captioning in a live presentation a useful thing, or is it more distracting, or does it vary depending on who the person is? Is this helpful? Is this just you guys are not paying attention to me because you're looking at there to see if the words are being spelled wrong? You know, is this a dog and pony show at this point? Is it going to be better?
So many questions.
It's generating captions that, because you're not speaking the punctuation,
Correct.
come
Period.
in as just a stream of text. And compliance aside, usability is a problem. Otter.ai and other things have found ways to separate out the speakers for other purposes.
It's really distracting, isn't it? I'm turn it off.
It kind of reminds me of, former English major here, having to read a novel written in stream of consciousness.
Right,
And
Jack
there's
Kerouac,
parts-
right.
there's parts. I mean, I'm sure there's great
Or text messages, right?
analysis.
And I think it's also, I mean, it's easy to forget if you are able to hear, in addition to reading them, that when you can't hear it, you don't have, our brain is filling in so much of the spacing between sentences and things like that, I think it can seem to folks like us, like, this is okay, it's better than nothing maybe, but if you're, I think we don't have we're not the best judges of
Right.
that.
I go into a dicey territory here of experiential teaching in accessibility, because to tie someone's arm behind their back and make them have the experience of someone with that disability is, one, insulting to people with disabilities, and two, totally silly, because people with disabilities have 10 gazillion workarounds you don't know about unless you've been there. But I wonder if video that we could access through a Canvas site or something of what things look like through a screen reader, if you've hyperlinked click here, for example, or some very common things like that, just to let a faculty member know what's happening on the other side. When I design, I always design to 2 screens. One, I'm logged in as a dummy student, and the admins that do it, Teresa at the Learn at UW support team, I'm really sorry, get all kinds of requests for me because I need sandbox sites, and I need test students, and I need multiple test students too, because I gotta make them do different things. But I have to see it exactly how the student's seeing it, and Student View does not do that. Don't try me on that. And it does not work with the LTI stuff either. I need my mock students, I really do. And that's part of my design philosophy. What if I took that towards, could I see it through, the example of some UX things tell you to use a straw, or different ways to narrow your vision of the screen, to test it yourself. Just a quick video that doesn't ask you to go into any kind of performative ritual of experiencing disability, quote unquote, but showing you this is what this kind of product generates, this is what this kind of product generates for your end user who is actually your student. And if that would be a good resource for people.
And I think even just having a colleague as a student, add them as a student, can they do that now anymore with?
You can't add anybody as a student anymore without serious.
You can add them as an observer, but I don't know how much.
The observers still have access. There's no role that does not have access to the grade book. I cannot add my writing fellows to my class, and I am very angry. I have been through every role available in recent days.
All right, I'm just going to erase this then.
I do think with that though, you want, to that point, you probably also want an example of someone who actually has that disability using it. That was something that we went through at Epic that we really struggled with, was we had people with sighted users trying to test for screen reader. And the thing is that people who use a screen reader have expectations of how that screen reader will behave, which are independent of, they don't have necessarily expectations about Canvas. They have expectations about how they should be able to use their screen reader to interact with the web. And so we had a user come in who was actually blind and who actually used a screen reader. And watching him was totally, I mean, because we're fumbling around, because I have my idea of this is how my workflow should work, and I'm replicating it with my eyes closed. And like, I think watching that user and how, like, what he did to troubleshoot was completely different than what I would do to troubleshoot, because I'm trying to, like, I already have my expectations. So I think watching someone actually use the assistive technology is more, like, and also getting the sense that, yeah, screen reader voices are annoying. Like, there's some of it that you can get just by, like, yeah, it's annoying and there's problems, but also, like, watching people and seeing, like, oh, wow, they have different, like, I think that's also making them the master of their own experience. Like, it's not, you can't necessarily spend 5 minutes listening to Jaws and understand what it's like. Like, I think that's the challenge. It's like, you should watch and be like, this person's master, they have a different skill set. It's an equally valid skill set, and you need to make your content accessible to their skill set rather than just being like,
it is very much a skill set. It is very much a side of innovation. But my one caveat would be, we can't make disabilities uniform.
Right.
People, what helps me, HTML anchors, because scrolling is a visual tracking problem, would really aggravate someone with a screen reader, because then I got all these hyperlinked things up at the top of the page. So disabilities are not uniform, users are not uniform, and we just have to be careful not to make one person the spokesperson or spokeswoman for a certain group.
Well, it's too much work, right? And again, you'd only capture the gajillion workarounds that they have, but not the gajillion workarounds of another.
But in any UX context, you're getting the view of one person who you hope is representative of a certain group of your users, maybe, right? But you're not getting the view of everybody.
Yeah, I think if you do a couple examples, it's still, because like right now the paradigm people are operating on is they still have a single model of the student in their head, and often that student is, 18 to 24 years old, able-bodied, whatever. Like they already are designing to a student that they have in mind, and that's already leaving more people out. So I think personas is a helpful way to like have a couple. I feel like the whole point here is not that these 3 people are the 3 people you have designed for. It's there's a spectrum of experience, and you can as you start to think of more, you start to be able to kind of see that larger perspective.
So I'm going to go back and revisit this idea of multiple means, because since we can't design one thing for lots of people, can we have multiple hooks for people to hang their hat on and come up and connect as many different dots as they can? And is there a way for us as instructors and instructional designers to do this in a way that's efficient, effective, without having to say, hey, user with disability X and Y and Z and whatever, come in and test my course? Are there some general practices? Margine, you had...
So I'm looking at that going, yes, but then I'm looking at biggest challenges and thinking about this concept of culture.
Prioritizing and
the word flexibility, right? And one of the biggest pushbacks that I have seen, and it comes from an okay place, I think not quite fully understanding or humanizing, but the negotiating the concept of fairness, so people get what they need, and equality, where everybody gets, how can I be sure that this kid's not taking advantage of this, or
it's not your job,
right? Well, how can I? But going to universal design, the concept that, and I'm not arguing for this, but I'm saying that some people are saying,
oh, I've heard it plenty of
my
times
level
myself.
of flexibility, it means that, this person I'm flexible with this person, do I have to be flexible with them? Do I have to be, so
or why should I do all of this for just one person is one I get.
So and the creativity that goes into thinking through multiple means. Right?
That we happen upon interesting things along the way
Yeah.
is what I would argue.
I think if you phrase it aspirationally, that goes along. Like
Yes.
you're saying, like it's not about, and even in that case of how can I not, what if the student abuses it? I think if you try to find some nice argument about trusting students and that they're curious and they want to engage, I think you get farther. And even universal design, or saying we'll find interest, your course will be better designed in general. It's not just about corner,
And maybe it makes you think, does that assessment really have to be timed?
Yeah.
Because I have some that really don't need to be timed, and by taking time limits off of them, I massively simplified my life and a lot of other people's.
Yeah.
This semester I have some that I really do feel need to be timed, and that's an instructional decision. But it makes you rethink things you had taken for granted. One of my sticking points is, where do I go when I need help? It's really easy for me to embed Google Maps and do cool things with them, and I know Sid has a past life as a cartographer or something, and I've been wanting to get in contact with her about this really cool project idea I have. But when I start embedding stuff, and I've got LTI integration with Canvas and Hypothesis and H5P, and oh my God, what am I going to do if somebody comes to me and says, I need full text-to-speech and I need da-da-da-da-da-da? So where do we go for help? And I got a text-to-speech accommodation for a course I had not designed, where they had not OCR'd the PDFs. Like I said, you should always OCR your PDFs. And I had 2 weeks to deal with it in a fully online course, and McBurney sent in, D2L had a role for accessibility inspector. McBurney sent in someone to test my course, which was helpful because they caught a couple of things I hadn't. But I had other things to do those 2 weeks. Where do we as faculty go for help? And what if I want to use those Google Maps?
Or I'm thinking in folklore, you have text and you have to scan it because they don't have it. It's not been digitized or something to that effect. How do we translate and scan?
If I have something that's manuscript.
Right, exactly.
If I have Jim Leary, who just retired from Folklore here, who kindly gave me raw field recordings, awesome to put on my course site, but I've got to get that all in text format. And I know I need to do that, and I know I want to do that, but does the university offer me a way to do that until I have an accommodation letter in my hands?
What kind of help would be most useful?
Captioning.
That you could just say, can you elaborate?
Here's some MP4 files. They need to be captioned. Here's, I don't know why WPT has a documentary that's not captioned. I'm about to take that up with them. But here's a different documentary that's not captioned. This needs to be captioned. There's a complication in that there are going to be a couple words in French here and there. The métier, or the coureur de bois in the fur trade. But that's going to be 1% of the words. Then it gets a lot more complicated if somebody gets one of these letters and is teaching a class that's exclusively in French. That's where I have seen people argue essential nature of the course. So, and when you look at the I think we have 3 different vendors for captioning or something. They're costly.
And your department bears the cost.
And I have a very limited design budget. So there's no way I get it done in that budget.
Interesting that it's part of the design budget and not part of some other.
It's not part of my design budget. There's no way I could have budgeted it in. I'm lucky to get any design budget.
So we only have a minute or 2 left. Are there any big questions that we have not addressed that we need to address before you leave. If not, one of the questions that I want to ask is, how much can we ask students? And I'm thinking more in the universal design than specific to our students who come to us with accommodation letters, about what they need or what could be done better. Will it be a benefit in asking general student what can be done better for assignment A, assignment B, assignment C, lecture A, lecture B, all of these things, and taking that into account? Is it helping crowdsourcing?
Cover letters for an individual's kind of feedback. I've started doing self-assessments. This is also called Jennifer's Theory of Chaos Mitigation, so I can mass enroll online classes. Self-assessments mean you're going to bring together your discussions from this week and last week. Tell me which posts you're proud of. But then you're going to reflect on the learning. What did you learn from interacting with others? What parts of this worked for you? How could this have worked differently? Because you might have learned something that totally escaped me.
Yep, reflective learning, not just the assessments that the instructor wants, but other things.
Right, and so that's where I've tried, and that's where grades are coming for the bulk of the work besides those auto-graded quizzes, so that students are feeling like they're getting to represent their learning a little more. And then there are those optional questions. Anything else you'd like me to know? Anything that I could make better, that you've seen work better in another class? They love to be my spies.
Right. And they have dozens of instructors in classes.
I mean, they are the experts. Right. These are some good spies to have on my side. Yeah. Go find me some ideas. Bring them back.
All right. So to be respectful of time, thank you all for coming. Thank you, contributors, for coming and helping out. Especially on the cold day. If before you can leave, if you just hit a few check boxes and write a few things and ideas and suggestions, that would be awesome.